Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Empowered to Live. I am your host, Andrea Rose Butler of Becoming a Woman's Network, and I'm so excited today to have my first guest on my podcast, Miss Rita Stewart. Yay! Of Legacy Financial. I'm so glad that she was able to join us in this series that we started on getting your financial house in order. And so that we talked about these important steps of how do we get our house in order from looking at our money story to find about how our mindset is regarding scarcity and abundance. We talked about rewriting your money story, and we also shared last week about is your bag secure. And so tonight we're sharing about beyond securing the bag. Remember, we talked about that
Mhm.
securing the bag is about gaining stability in our finance, not just about having money, but about being stable and not having the chaos of our lives. We talked about debt. We talked about, savings, and I just touched on these areas. And as I shared, that Rita was going to go into a little bit more in detail about some of these areas that I am not licensed in, and so she is going to be touching on those things. So Rita comes to us with over 20 years of banking experience before transitioning and garnering overall a decade of experience in congregational and nonprofit services. And today she blends both professional and ministry experience by serving in different capacities in the nonprofit arena, and then she's also an independent licensed representative of a Legacy Financial Services. And Rita, tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do, what services that you offer to our viewers that they can go ahead and take part in that.
Absolutely. Andrea, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening, this afternoon, whenever you all may be listening. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I am very passionate about coming alongside individuals, and I will say mainly women, but not to say that, there aren't male customers that I have. But my goal is to ensure that you come to a place where you understand your very own personal financial empowerment, and as a result of that, so that you will be positioned so that you will be financially well, and so that your money, your funds will last you all the days of your life. That is my goal with the work that I do. So it's important that I stay the course in terms of my work and what I'm doing. It can be where you're planning for retirement. It can be where you're trying to figure out how to do college planning and paying for that for your household. It can be where you're trying to figure out, how can I protect the money that I already have? What solutions can I put in place so that my money will last me the rest of my days? Also, so I can minimize my tax implications on that money, etc. I love my work. So, insurances, personal pensions, things like that. That's how I support individuals.
Awesome. And that is a great work, in helping individuals because a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And, and,
Correct.
and we get to the end of our lives, like I always have to say, and we're unprepared,
Yes.
for
Yes.
that part when we come into retirement or we're thinking about retirement. As I shared in previous week, I said, a lot of times we're not prepared for, even for a rain. We're not even talking about the storm. We talking about the rain starts falling, and we are so unprepared even for rain. And
Yeah.
so, how do we get ourselves prepared for when the rain comes or when the
Correct.
wind starts blowing? On our lives, and life starts lifing, and we get into those places, and we're like, we have no money because of the fact that we've been consumers for so long that we don't
Yes.
know how to have that foundation that we need of being able to not even leave a legacy, but being able to just live
Correct.
a life.
Correct.
We're
Correct.
living longer, as we take care of ourselves and we're doing stuff, and medicine has grown, we're living longer, and so we're not like our grandparents. And so how do we get beyond their story of money under the mattress and different things like that, or just really just don't know what they're going to do. And I, at my work with social services, I see so many seniors
Yeah.
who maybe, especially women, and that's why my ministry is also to women
Yeah.
who are been housewives, and it never
Yes.
worked. And that 731 of SSI is just not going to cut it.
No.
There was no preparation for them, whether the husband gets into his 60s, 70s and decides he needs a younger wife and she's left behind with nothing. And so how do we prepare ourselves to live that life that we are called to live?
And
And
sometimes, excuse me, Andrea, I find that I get these calls where women are in financial distress and or experiencing financial abuse. We hear about, other forms of abuse, but not often that we hear about financial abuse. And I think it's like you're saying, it's a conversation. It is where there is an opportunity to, how do I say, ensure that you are educated on what's possible from a financial perspective, and you take it from there, right? So that you don't have to find yourself in a situation where you're desperate from a financial perspective. Start where you are. And actually, it doesn't take much if you just get started, because you get to leverage the compounding of what you're able to put aside.
Mhm.
So we got to stop making money a taboo discussion
Right.
and be open about it, because there is a way that we can position ourselves well.
And this is so true. A lot of times we fear money, and
Yeah,
we look
yeah,
at it as, I think especially for those in Christendom, they would say, the root of evil is the love of money and stuff like that. But we need money to survive. We need
yeah,
money to get by in life, and everything runs on money. And so without it, there's nothing that we can do. And so, we have to get to that place where we are comfortable with that conversation, unlike our parents who weren't comfortable having money conversations. And so they didn't talk about it. It was the stuff that was done in secret, and nobody knew what was going on. Um, and so, how do we get to this place in this generation, especially, like even in my age group,
yeah.
where, I'm pushing all 60. And so, how do we get those conversations in and we're comfortable about it? And then we talk to the next generation so that the next generation can talk about, what money is all about.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And so we want to jump in on about first is about taking saving seriously. And so that's kind of the basics of where to begin building that legacy, or even that, getting out of debt. I shared in previous, start small. And
Yes.
so what do you think stops people from prioritizing saving money even when they know that it's important for them to do so?
It's interesting. Making reference to debt versus savings. I come alongside individuals sometimes, they seem to be so desperate to get out of debt that they will forfeit the savings in order to pay the debt off. So I think about a story about a young lady. She was doing very well from a financial perspective in terms of how much money she made, had a pretty decent mortgage. However, she had, a tremendous amount of credit card debt. And as a result of it, she said, Mrs. Stewart, I just want to come alongside you to try to get out of debt. Okay, so first of all, I'm not a debt expert or credit expert, so I had to explain that to her. But what I did share with her was the fact that you cannot afford to forfeit putting savings aside and focus on debt, because if you were to have another financial incident, I don't know, you need new tires for the cars, you have to get to work and back, right? So the car has to be mobile for you. Then if you have not started to put money aside, Andrea, you're going to go back to the credit card.
Hmm.
So you need to position yourself to have your money put aside. And I talked to them about not only just a savings account, but also an emergency fund. And many people are surprised that there's a difference there.
Right, right. And there should be two, and there should be one where you have that, I set up one. There's so many different apps that you can set stuff aside. I know my kids are great. They use Capital,
Mhm.
um, and I just set up a separate account where I just call it for the rain.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I like that.
This is for the rain. When the rain comes, we need something for the rain.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then, have a separate account for, savings for this is for my future. This is just for the when the rain comes. And then I even shared with on this before, and I shared this with my kids. When I was working, and I still do that now, is that I separate my money out. where I
Hmm.
have a separate account where this is my I want to have fun money.
Yeah.
And but it puts gas in my car and stuff like that. But it's mostly for just I want to go out to dinner. My friends are like, let's go get something to eat. My kids are like, let's go out to dinner. I'm like, okay. And I don't have to worry about that touching where my mortgage was coming from and the major bills came out of this account. And so, there's just ways that you can set things up where you can save
Well,
and use.
here's, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask another question, but you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, well, here is where I generally coach people when it comes to things like that. I just said a few minutes ago, your emergency fund is something totally different from your savings account. And many people will think, oh, I thought it was one and the same. I have an emergency fund in case something happened, the rainy day fund, right? Or the rain fund. But with an emergency fund, what I say is if you know your expenses are, let's say, hypothetically, $1,000 per month, then in that
Hmm.
emergency fund, you truly want to make sure at minimum you have $1,000 set aside so that if there's some type of interruption in your money coming in, et cetera, you can manage to your expenses for a month. Now,
Hmm.
optimally, 3 to 6 months is even better. But
Right.
having that first 1 month set aside will give you an opportunity to just simply breathe. So that's your emergency fund. And I often recommend that's placed in a high yield savings account because we know, Andrea, that the amount of interest you receive or being paid or credited at the bank is very nominal right now.
Hmm.
Whereas with a high yield savings account, we're looking at anywhere from 3 to 5%, depending on where it is. And most of these accounts are online, so that's good. And then I say with the savings account has nothing to do with your emergency fund. And I
Right.
tell them with the savings account, just like you have a budget or a spending plan and you tell the money what to do, or whatever money's you coming in, how it needs to be allocated, similar to what you said, I encourage people to tell their savings account how it is to be used. So, or savings categories. Now, there are certain apps that allow you to set up the categories, but if you have that one savings account and if you have an Excel spreadsheet, you can do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I say, 20% for the car, 20% for the house, 40% for long term goals, and then 20% for the fund you just made reference to. Because otherwise, we just hold on to that money, right? And try to lock it in and don't want to spend anything, but we're miserable because we're worried about what might. If you have that emergency fund over there, Andrea, and then you have your savings account, and then you find out you need to go and replace the dryer in the home, 20% of the money that you've allocated in that savings account is for you to take care of the home.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
It's so simple, but yet many just have not considered it that way.
Right.
I also tell them to make sure you hold yourself accountable to ensure that you're making those consistent deposits
That's
to
right.
the savings account, right? And consistency matters. And even if you're starting with $25 a pay, right? $100 a pay, whatever that number is, be consistent. It accumulates faster than you realize, doesn't it?
It does. And I shared, now we're going to get to that automating process. And I shared that too. I said, have them taken out automatically out of your paycheck. Make HR work for you. Set that payroll withdrawals up so it automatically comes out. And then your mind would eventually get used to what you bring home. And you have that money already in savings and you don't have to worry about it because it's an automated process of having that money taken out and then don't spend it. One of the things I
Right.
would do is sometimes I like disconnecting them to keep it from temptation. I don't want it to be also where my overdraft is so that I mess myself up because I got happy and we saw that impulse spending and I went shopping and then now I overdraft and then there's a whole nother what is his name? Dave Ramsey calls it paying stupid tax because you overdraft. And you end up paying stupid tax because you overdraft your account. And so there's just so many different things and it's wasted money and
Yeah.
that you have when you don't have that. And so you've already so again for someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, like what's a small step that they can take towards saving? And I think we touched a little bit on it.
Yeah.
Starting small, I
Absolutely. I
and then
mean, again, $25 a pay, whatever works for you. And even if there could be someone we're talking to who doesn't even have a savings account set up yet. Well, then you start, take in $10 per pay, wherever you need to start, $25 a pay, putting it aside until you go and actually open up a savings account. But we'll say this to you: if you don't have a savings account open yet, go do it now, like today, right?
Yes.
Get that done because it's important. The other thing I will say in terms of, starting where you are, you also have to be comfortable about not allowing, what's happening in the marketplace or what's happening amongst your friends, what's happening amongst your family members to cause you to get off track. So
Right.
where I'm going with that, I'm thinking about an incident where my sister had invited me to go on a cruise with her work friends, right? Sounds good, right? However, I said no. And she's like, well, you said that fast. I was able to respond immediately, Andrea, because I already had my own goals. I already knew what I wanted to do. So you
Mhm.
can't get caught up in what someone else is trying to do, or what may sound like fun and I really want to do it, if you already have defined what your financial goals are.
Right.
Now, if you have started the process and have put away the emergency fund and you have money allocated for fun that would have worked for you to go on that trip or me to go on that cruise, and you go. But I
Mhm.
had other places that I wanted to travel and other places I wanted to go with my husband. So going with her on a girls' trip on a cruise wasn't part of the plan, right? So go have fun. But you got to be able to say no. You have to be able to stand up for yourself. Um, but if you don't have a goal, if you don't have a plan, then you're going to follow everybody else's plan.
Right. And you get pulled, and you get pulled in peer pressure, and it was like, oh, you just, you're just a Debbie Downer, or all this other stuff. You don't know how to have fun, But I look at it, and I shared this before, where people always say, how are you going on these trips? How you doing this? We make the same amount of money, and you don't understand. I say, well, I bring my lunch to work. You go out and you spend $15 a day going out to eat for lunch, and then you go out to dinner, and you're like, oh, I spent $100. See, that's not my story because I had
Right.
plans.
Right.
I wanted to travel. I wanted to do stuff. There were things I wanted to do. And like you said, you have to sometimes be that place where you may be the one. They were like, oh, you're a party pooper. So be it.
That's right.
I'm in debt and I need to get out. You're
Yes.
free. I'm in bondage. I can't
Yeah.
allow you to have me stay in bondage because of the fact that you want me to go with you. You want me to do these things when I know that I'm struggling, and these credit card companies are calling me because and I'm so far behind in what I need to do, and I can't see up, and I want out. I want
That's right.
out. And so how do you do that? It's by
And you know
taking
what else?
steps.
It's the most liberating thing. I can speak for myself. I think we've all had our own financial journeys and stories. And it is the most liberating thing when you pay off that first debt, or
Yes.
when you get to that $1,000 goal that you may have for your savings account. When you get to a place that you truly don't have to be dependent upon another person from a financial perspective, it is just life giving.
It is.
And I encourage everyone to do what they can to position themselves to be that way, right? There's nothing like it. There's just nothing like it.
It's not, and it is very liberating to do. And I
Yes.
encourage people. I said, and if you are addicted to that credit card, lock it, lock the
Yeah.
card. you know, I would say set up a password, give it to somebody else that you trust, and then lock that card because so you're not tempted to do that. Ask even to ask the credit card holder to lock it for you if you're having that issue and that temptation, especially when you're so far and you're already exceeded your credit limit and you've asked for increases and you just keep going and going. I have them to put a cap on what it is that you can, what you can go over and exceed
Yeah.
when the spending limits that you can't spend more than $150, and so you may need to set limits around yourself if
Yeah.
you know that this is a problem for you. Set up your own barrier, set up those protections, set boundaries up for yourself to keep you from continuing to go. Because sometimes we get ourselves out and
Yeah.
then we put ourselves
Go
right back
back.
in, and
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
cycle. And so you may that be something that you may need to do to kind of help yourself.
Well, and that's why I say you have to save. You can't just focus on getting out of debt. You have to save because when something happens, you're going to have your nest egg to be able to do what you need to do. And on the flip side of it, in terms of credit cards, I will say this. I mean, when you get to a place where, there is a healthy relationship with your credit and what's made available to you, I generally will say be strategic about how you use credit cards. And so, to give the example, I like frequent flyer miles. My daughter lives on the West Coast, and as a result of that, I want to be able to fly at will. So, but I'm very, very intentional and very strategic with my American Express miles so that I can fly 2 to 3 times a year on points. And, I know I'm going to get double the points at the grocery store. I know I'm going to get double the points at a restaurant. So I'm going to use the card. But I'm also every Sunday evening, I'm going to pay it off. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have the discipline, then no, don't do it. If you know that you want your annual family vacations to be covered because of the points you can get from certain, a Hilton card or whatever the case may be strategic. But if you're not at that place yet, do not go near them, right?
Right.
Stay away from them.
Same way,
But
same way.
otherwise, yeah, use them to your advantage. That's what you got to do. So think about it, be strategic, and keep the balances low, pay them off. If you find that you need to carry a balance for whatever reason, then you want to stay at the 30% threshold. So like you said, if they give you a credit limit, hypothetically $1,000, here I go again, it's just easy to round the numbers, then you don't want that balance to ever be over $300 because that can have an impact on your credit score, things like that. So just be mindful, just be very, very careful about the use of credit, period.
Right. And it's very important that, yeah, credit should be a tool again. Just like
Yes.
your money, it's a tool.
Yes.
So where you don't have that emergency savings done, but pay it off as quickly as possible. And like you said, that that debt to income ratio
Yep.
uh, drives your credit score. And
Yes.
again, and then we were talking earlier about how that credit score affects so many areas of our lives, from employment to your car insurance to anything that you're looking at. Those creditors or insurers or all those things, they're looking at seeing what kind of a risk are you
Yes.
based on that credit score. So check it. I shared in previous posts. Podcast about checking your FICO score. It's free at the bank, so check those things. Be aware
Yeah.
of where you are, what you have, and then be strategic in how you're using
Yes.
everything that you have. And it's all
Yes.
about being intentional and being strategic as we're planning and getting our financial house in order.
And I will say one more thing in terms of our credit. When you think about people who are vulnerable, who really just don't know how to manage all of this stuff, and then they have a credit profile out there, you want to be mindful of the fact that you could deal with identity theft, right?
Mhm.
So that's another reason why we really, really need to stay on top of these things. Because if you get caught up in a web or a cycle of identity theft, it's hard to work through all of that stuff. Some of the
Yes.
legalities and things like that, and all the letters and things like that that has to take place. And think about those in your inner circle again who are vulnerable as well. So you mentioned earlier, and maybe it was before we got started with the segment, that if there's an opportunity to lock the credit profile, then lock the credit profile,
Yep.
because that will be very helpful. And again, much of what I'm sharing right now is just based on experience, or what I've learned from the banking industry, things like that. But just be very mindful. Stop, not wanting to have these conversations. Show up to have the conversations like this from a
Right.
financial perspective, because it impacts your overall financial wellness.
It does, and like I said, your finances affects every area of your life. So you just want to be mindful of all of those things. And we talked about the automation process of how to automate our finances. And so when we think about that automation, we talked about having that direct deposit, taking that out of your paycheck to kind of reduce the stress of you having to remember to save. or you
Yeah.
remember to do those things. So, set up those automated processes because it's so easy to do in this technological age to be able to do and to set yourself up that way. So, when it comes to organizing your accounts, what's a good structure for someone who wants to feel more in control of their automated process of their finances?
I mean, again, stop and take the time to truly know where you stand. A lot of times, Andrea, people are in a better financial position than they even realize, but they won't look at the numbers. So, if you would take the time to look at the numbers, and many don't like the word budget. And so, again, sometimes I refer to them as your, strategic plan around your money. But take the time to look, understand clearly everything that's coming in and everything that's going out. And where there's an opportunity for you to make the adjustments, these subscriptions, for instance, that we tend to carry forever and a day, forget we are even subscribed to certain things, turn those things off and ensure that if it's $10, if it's $25, that could be allocated towards your savings, right? So I think the first thing is one, having a conversation. The second thing is truly taking the time to step through. Sometimes if I'm going to come alongside a client to help them with their long range financial goals, retirement, next home, whatever the case may be, you have to step back to the beginning. Well, what exactly is coming in and going out? Ms. Rita, I don't know. I don't even know that I want to look. I don't know that I want to know. The same thing also happens, Andrea, in terms of when individuals are coming to me, they may be 55, 60 years old, and they're ready to retire, right? And as a result of that, it's like, okay, well, what's in your IRA right now? What's in your Roth right now? What's in your 401k right now? Andrea, they haven't looked. I mean, they don't even know where they stand,
I
or
need
they
to
don't even know
know.
they don't know their earnings or their crediting strategies. So I'm still gonna go right back to what I said originally. Look, okay, sit down with the numbers and have a look. And again, I will say many times, people are better positioned than they realize. It's just this I don't know, this avoidance we have around, understanding our money and knowing where we are. So use a budget template, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet again, and or an online app. Use them. And then with your monies for long range plannings, okay, I think you should look at your retirement portfolio more than once a year. That's with your employer, right? Maybe quarterly even. But look, so yeah, have the conversation and look. I will also say this: sometimes your loved one, your partner, your significant other, whatever the case may be, they may avoid that. They may not want to have the money conversation, right? Well, then you know what we need to do, Andrea? We need to start where we are. We
Mhm.
need to model it for ourselves. We
Right.
need to give ourselves the peace of mind. They will generally follow suit. So look at what you have and have the conversations that you need to have. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and this is so important. You mentioned that, and I shared in one of the earlier broadcasts about if you're not having that talking about retirement, that employer match, even if you're doing 1%, again, it's back to Dave Ramsey's stupid tax because if you're not allowing that match, even if you're only doing 1% and your employer matches you 1%, you know you have to do something. You have to be able because you're planning for your future, you know, for your long term goals. You
Yeah,
don't want to get to that place where you are afraid,
yeah,
because your partner or spouse, whatever, passes away, then you are left trying to figure this stuff out and you don't have that conversation and you need to sit down and have those conversations if you have kids, having that conversations with your children, and so that everybody is on the same page as to what needs to take place and know what you have and where things are and all those different things, so you know that you have an awareness. I check mine. I'm not employed anymore with the city, but I still check mine because it's still getting interest. I need to
yeah,
know where am I, in that. I'm not ready to actually check my retirement yet, but I need to know what I have. And
yeah,
as I'm working, towards, continue working towards a goal,
Yeah.
I know what I need to do, and I know where I stand. I even check my social security.
Yes.
I start working. How much is this right here? Is social security, if I have this, if I decided to take it at this age or that age or whatever, I'm making sure that I know exactly where I stand. And it's so important that people not be afraid to look.
Yep.
You know?
We could continue that conversation because I have so many different scenarios where I've come alongside individuals from that perspective. And I think that's the main thing. I think that people want to know that they will not outlive their money and it can be done. So, but it starts with them taking a look. And goodness gracious, it's just a beautiful thing when they see the
Yeah,
bigger picture of what's possible.
right. And you know how to plan. Because if you, like they said, if you don't plan, then you fail to plan. And so when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so
Yeah.
you need to have that plan in place so that you know what you have, where you're going, what you need to do. If you're not there yet and you need to catch up, how do I do that? How do I balance that with having debt and that? So all of these different things are just so important to make sure that um, we know where we're going, and that it means that we can take care of ourselves. We touched on about paying ourselves, having that fund money, but also it's important to be out of debt.
Yeah.
And so when we think about debt, is one of the biggest financial stressors that is out there. When you're living under that shackle of debt, it is so stressful for us. And so what's the first step someone should take when they're serious about getting out of debt? And I know we touched a little bit on that, but as far as a first step of what's something that they can do, um, you mentioned being aware of it first of all, but what's something else that they can do when they're seriously considering getting out of debt?
I mean, I still, again, have to go back to the awareness, right? Like sometimes people will say, or sometimes people recommend pay off the account that has the higher interest rate, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes people will say pay off the account that has the highest balance, whatever that might be. Um, I say get a win. I say go for a WIN, a win. And as a result, you will get some wind, WIND, beneath your sail to continue the process of getting out of debt. So, you owe 20,000, you owe 8,000, you owe 600. Get the $600 paid off because you're going to feel
Hmm.
really, really good about that, right? You're going to feel good about that. And as a
Right.
result of feeling good about that, um, you are going to then take that momentum, that wind beneath your sail, and go on to the next opportunity to pay off. But again, I do not say forfeit your savings for debt. So people generally, I say if it means all you can do right now is a minimum, because you do need to start making that 1% contribution to that 401k, and you do need to get this emergency fund in place, and you do need to start in a savings account in case something happens to the car or the home. I never ever say forfeit doing those things before paying off the debt. So if it means at first you got to start with the minimum, then start with the minimum payments. But I always recommend start with the lowest account that's owed and then get some momentum and take it from there.
Right. And then it's kind of that snowball effect. You pay off that one, and then you take that money from there that you were paying there, and then you put it to this
Yeah.
one, and then you do the next one, and then you keep doing it until you're finally free of
Yeah.
that debt. And it takes work. And I shared more about it being intentional. That you have to be intentional about it. It can't be just a hit or miss. You have to work the plan and keep on the journey. And I know it gets frustrating, and sometimes we're fearful, but it's important for us to be able to move forward and get out from underneath that weight of debt. And so, um,
Yeah. So how are we with time? Are we good?
so
I know we wanted to spend some time.
yes, we did. So we're going to so let me wrap. So we're going to wrap up this
Okay.
segment today, And then we are going to come back with Rita Stewart. She's going to join us for a part
Wonderful.
two being of beyond securing the bag, and she's going to be joining us next week. So stay tuned for that as we go into uh, part two. And
Thank
again,
you.
remember that God has given us everything that we need to live this life and to live it godly. And so thank you, Rita, for being here, for being my guest on the show. And I look forward to speaking with you again in part two.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Welcome.